The moment that changed everything. The studio lights hummed quietly above the microphones, the kind of silence that came before something raw and unforgettable. Joe Rogan leaned forward, fingers loosely clasped under his chin, watching Keanu Reeves with that mixture of curiosity and caution. This wasn't the part of the conversation they had planned. This wasn't about martial arts, philosophy, or motorcycles. This was something else. Keanu's usually composed face shifted. His gaze softened, mouth tightening like he was holding something sacred between his teeth. There was a moment where he looked down at his hands, as if what he was about to say had lived in the lines of his palms for decades, waiting for a moment like this to be seen. "I want to tell you something," Keanu said slowly, his voice carrying that gravelly calm that fans had heard in movies but never quite like this. "Something I never thought I'd say out loud, not because I was hiding it, but because I didn't know how much it still lived inside me." Joe nodded slightly, sensing the gravity, and said nothing. "She was the only person who ever called me out with a smile," Keanu continued, eyes distant now, not seeing the studio, the cameras, the sound, crew, but something far away. "We were sitting in this small restaurant in New York. It wasn't fancy. No bodyguards, no fans, just two people with coffee cups between them laughing about something dumb. I don't even remember the joke, but I remember how she looked at me after, like she knew I needed that laugh more than anything else." And just like that, the room shifted. Everyone knew Sandra Bullock as America's sweetheart, the fearless, graceful actress with the laughter that could light up a whole room. But this wasn't about Hollywood. This was about something private, untold, carved into Keanu's quiet heart. He looked over at Joe and smiled faintly, the kind of smile that aches because it carries both gratitude and grief. "Sandra had this way of seeing people," he said. "Not the way fans or the press see us, not the image, but the person underneath it all. And when she saw you, really saw you, it made you want to be that better version she somehow already believed you were." Joe finally spoke, but gently. "So you guys were close." Keanu chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "We were more than close, and less than what people assumed. You know those people you meet once in a lifetime, and somehow they become part of your wiring, like they're always with you even when you're far apart." He paused, swallowing something unspoken. "That was her for me." The air in the studio had thickened with emotion, the kind that makes even background staff stop in their tracks. Joe leaned back, visibly moved but respectful. "Did you ever tell her that?" That question lingered longer than it should have. Keanu blinked slowly, exhaling a breath that seemed to carry years. "I tried," he said, "but timing is a funny thing. Back then we were always in motion, film sets, flights, fame, fatigue. You think you've got time, you always think you'll say it the next time. And then life happens, or death, or silence. And suddenly you're left with all these words you never said, so I kept them, for years, until now." Joe didn't interrupt. No one dared to. And Keanu went on. "She once told me that I reminded her of her father, not because of how I looked, but because of the way I listened. She said I listened like I was collecting pieces of a person, not fixing them, just holding them. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just smiled. But I remembered. I remembered because I'd never been told something so intimate, so specific. She trusted me with a piece of her memory, and I did everything I could to honor it." The cameras kept rolling, but no one was thinking about an audience anymore. This was no longer a podcast. It was a confession, wrapped in the hushed reverence of a man finally peeling open a story he'd kept guarded, not because of shame, but because of love. A rare, respectful, quiet kind of love. Keanu sat back, his hands open now in his lap. "We had this rule, Sandra and I, we never said goodbye on the phone. Always talk soon, or later, or just silence. I think we were both afraid that goodbye meant something more permanent. Maybe we were right." Joe swallowed hard and looked away for a beat, as if giving Keanu space. "Did you love her?" he finally asked. And for the first time, Keanu's eyes truly filled. "I still do," he whispered. A silence fell so heavy, so raw, even the soundproof walls seemed to breathe with it. In that moment, the entire internet could have gone offline and it wouldn't have mattered. Because what had just been shared was more than content. It was a window into something eternal, grief, love, missed chances, and the aching beauty of unspoken devotion. But this was only the beginning. The letter she never sent. After that confession, the studio didn't return to normal, not for a while. Not even when Joe Rogan, ever the seasoned host, moved on to the next question. There was a long pause before he spoke again, and even then his words were cautious, almost reverent, like he knew the conversation had entered sacred ground. The silence between them wasn't awkward, it was weight. It was history unfolding gently, one hidden truth at a time. The internet would later explode with speculation, with millions hanging on every syllable. But in that room, it wasn't for virality. It was something personal, something human, something Keanu had finally let surface after decades of carrying it alone. And what he didn't know, not yet, was that Sandra had also left behind a truth, one buried in a drawer, one written in ink, sealed and forgotten, a letter never sent. It wasn't until a week after the podcast aired that Keanu got a call from a woman he hadn't spoken to in over a year, Lucinda, Sandra's longtime personal assistant. They had met numerous times, shared dinners during filming, laughed backstage at premieres. But this call didn't come with a smile or a casual check-in. Her voice trembled like wind brushing through old memories. "Keanu," she said, clearing her throat, "there's something I think you should have." I didn't know if it was appropriate, but after what you said on the podcast, I think Sandra would want you to read this now. He paused, unsure how to respond. He was used to people calling about Sandra, agents, journalists, nostalgic co-stars, but this was different. The weight in Lucinda's voice wasn't professional, it was deeply personal. She mentioned a letter, something Sandra had written long ago but never sent. "She wrote it one night after the Tokyo premiere," Lucinda said. "I remember because she couldn't sleep. She'd just gotten back from that dinner with you, the one where you walked her barefoot back to the hotel through the rain, because she said her heels were tired of pretending to be elegant. You remember that?" Keanu chuckled quietly, eyes closing with the memory. "Yeah," he whispered, "I remember." Lucinda continued. "She wrote something that night, sealed it, and told me never to give it to you unless she was gone or unless you ever really spoke about her. Publicly, truly, not just press tour anecdotes, but real truth." There was a pause, and then, after the Joe Rogan episode, I knew this was the time. "It's hers, but it's yours, too. I'm sending it to you today." The next morning, Keanu sat alone in his study, the LA light slipping through linen curtains, touching the bookshelves and wooden floor like quiet hands searching for something lost. On his desk lay a simple cream-colored envelope, the kind people used in the 90s for handwritten notes, aged slightly at the edges. It smelled faintly of jasmine, the scent she always wore. He sat staring at it for what felt like hours, fingers resting on the seal like it might vanish if opened too quickly. Finally, with trembling hands, he tore it open. The letter inside was written in Sandra's handwriting, curvy, careful, with a few crossed-out words and ink smudges that made it more real, more alive. At the top, in capital letters, it said only, "For Keanu, in case I never tell you this myself." His breath caught, and then he read, "You once asked me if I believed in fate. I laughed, remember? I told you I believed in missed flights and rerouted taxis and stolen umbrellas. That's how the universe works. But that night in New York after the rain, something changed. You walked beside me like I wasn't just an actress with a schedule, but a woman whose silence needed company. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to be strong. You didn't try to fix me. You just stood there, getting wet. Smiling at nothing. There's something I've never said to you, and maybe I never will because we both keep things sacred by keeping them unsaid. But tonight, I wanted to write it just in case time cheats us. I loved you, Keanu. Not the way magazines guess, not the way fans pair us up like paper dolls. I loved you in the quietest way possible. The way a room feels safer when you walk in. The way coffee tastes better when your name is the first thing I say. The way I never had to pretend I was okay when I wasn't, because you never demanded the performance. You and we were always just a step away from a different life. And I used to think that was a tragedy, but now I think it was our miracle, because some people get forever and they waste it. We got moments, and we made them eternal. That's something even time can't undo. If you ever read this, it means I either found courage too late, or life didn't wait for me to catch up. But either way, I want you to know, you were my what if, the one that made me believe I was worthy of more. Love always in some form. S. Keanu didn't cry, not the way the movies show. He sat there, letter resting on his chest like a second heartbeat, eyes closed, lips parted, as though he were listening to a song only he could hear. The weight of words long buried was unlike anything he had ever held. She had written this thinking he might never see it, but she wrote it anyway. That was Sandra, quietly brave, emotionally honest, always loving with grace even when love was complicated. He folded the letter slowly, carefully, almost like tucking a sleeping child into bed. Then he placed it in a glass frame and set it on the piano, her favorite place in his home, where she used to sit and play a few clumsy notes, laughing at herself. That corner would never be just a corner again. It would be hers. and the world would never see Sandra and Keanu the same way again. Because sometimes the most powerful love stories are the ones that never needed an audience. But this one finally had found its voice. Like the rain that never left his jacket. The days after the letter passed like soft shadows over Keanu's life, brushing against his routine in ways only he could feel. The world continued to move around him, Hollywood meetings, scripts in padded envelopes, well-meaning messages from colleagues who saw the viral clip and thought he needed to talk or heal. But grief, real grief, doesn't announce itself with weeping or breakdowns. Sometimes it arrives in whispers, in the way you stop mid-sentence because a memory walks into the room, or in the way you turn to tell someone something only to remember they're not there. Keanu carried Sandra's letter the way you carry a scar under your skin, not visible to the world, but always there, throbbing faintly with every heartbeat. One evening, a week after receiving the letter, he found himself standing at the back of his garage, the one space in his home that hadn't been organized or polished in years. He wasn't looking for anything in particular. Maybe he just needed air that didn't come with expectations. That's when he saw it, the old leather jacket. It hung on a rusted nail, worn, creased, and forgotten like some relic of a simpler life. The same jacket he'd worn that night in New York, the night it had rained. The night she'd laughed and called him a walking umbrella with nice shoulders. He touched the sleeve and for a moment swore he could still smell jasmine. His breath caught in his throat. He picked it up carefully, fingers brushing the lining where something crinkled. First, he thought it was just a torn seam or a ticket stub. But when he reached in, his hand closed around something folded, something paper-thin but firm. He pulled it out and stared. A note. One he'd written himself years ago. It wasn't addressed. It wasn't meant for mailing. It was one of those things people write and never send, because the words feel too raw or too uncertain to release into the world. He unfolded it slowly, the creases deep and aged. His own handwriting stared back at him. Sandy, I don't know if you'll ever read this. Hell, I don't even know if I'll ever have the courage to leave it somewhere you'll find it. But tonight, as we walked barefoot across wet sidewalks and you told that story about pretending to be your own assistant just to get peace from the paparazzi, I saw you. Not the actress, not the icon, just you. And I think I fell for you right then. Maybe I'd already fallen before, I don't know. All I know is that I felt calm in a way I haven't felt in years. You laughed like the city was laughing with you. And when you looked at me, I felt like someone worth being looked at. I know we'll probably never be more than what we are. And maybe that's okay. But if I never say this, if I never show you, I just want you to know you make the silence feel full. You make me better. You make me want to write things I'll never send. Maybe this jacket will hold on to this letter until I'm brave enough. He stood frozen, the letter trembling slightly between his fingers. For years, he'd walked around thinking the feelings had been one-sided, that maybe she had simply seen him as a friend, a confidant, a safe harbor in a storm of fame. But now, with her letter and his, he realized they had been two souls walking in parallel, always close enough to touch, never quite meeting at the right time, always just one step out of sync. And yet, maybe that was the tragedy and the beauty of it all. Two letters written in silence, two hearts speaking across time, waiting for the right moment to finally listen. Later that night, he sat at his piano, her letter, and his placed side by side on the wood like quiet witnesses. He didn't play, he just sat, remembering. He remembered the first time they met, 1993, casting room, early morning coffee. She had tripped on the edge of a carpet and caught herself by grabbing his arm. "Great," she had said with a smirk. "Now if I get the role, people will say it's because I fell for you, literally." He remembered her hand on his chest during a break in filming Speed, resting there casually like it belonged. He remembered her drunk voicemail after the Golden Globes, slurring, "You still owe me a pasta night, Reeves, don't think I forgot." And he remembered the one voicemail he never returned, because he was on set, because he thought it could wait, because he assumed there would always be more time. But time is a trickster, it moves without mercy, and it doesn't care how good your intentions are. The next morning he made a call, not to a friend, not to a producer, but to a foundation. One that Sandra had supported quietly for years, an education initiative for girls in underfunded communities. He didn't make a donation in her name. He didn't want headlines. He offered to build a center anonymously with only one request, that it have a garden with jasmine, a reading room with soft chairs, and a plaque with just two initials, SB and K, R. Not to declare love to the world, but to let that love bloom somewhere it could grow, quietly and forever. That afternoon, the rain returned to LA, not heavy, just enough to remind the city of tenderness. Keanu stood at his window, the old jacket now folded neatly on the couch, and watched as droplets traced lines down the glass like tears from the sky. Somewhere out there, he believed, Sandra was smiling, maybe not watching, but smiling. Because finally, the things they never said were now spoken, not in interviews, not in fame's spotlight, but in the spaces where love is real, private, quiet, eternal. And the world, though it would never truly know the depths of what they shared, would carry pieces of it, through stories, through silence, through the hearts of those who understood that some bonds transcend time, distance, and even death. Because sometimes love doesn't need a stage, it just needs a moment. And now, after all these years, they finally had theirs. The interview he turned down, and the call that changed everything. In the weeks that followed, the world refused to let go of the podcast. Headlines spun it into countless versions. Keanu's hidden love for Sandra revealed, the letter that broke the internet, a romance that never was or always was. And yet none of them touched the truth. They only grazed the surface with glossy curiosity. The clips trended, fans speculated, old interviews were dissected like artifacts from a forgotten era, but Keanu didn't respond, not to emails. Not to producers begging for exclusives, not to talk shows dangling million-dollar offers for follow-ups. He turned it all down quietly, without explanation, not out of arrogance, but because some things are too sacred to become stories for sale. Then came the call. It wasn't from Hollywood or any media outlet. It was from someone he hadn't expected. Sandra's adopted niece, Clara, a young woman in her 20s, half timid, half fierce, carrying the same quiet strength Sandra once did. Her voice trembled with nerves when she spoke, as though unsure if she had the right to reach into his grief. "I hope I'm not intruding," she began. I needed to talk to you, and maybe I thought, after everything, you might need this too." He recognized her immediately. Sandra used to call her my little lighthouse. She'd shown Keanu photos, once Clara with tangled curls, books in hand, eyes older than her age. Keanu had sent her a piano once for her 10th birthday. He remembered that. Sandra had laughed, "You're spoiling her." But her voice had been warm when she said it. Clara continued, "I found something in her safe, along with old scripts, passports, awards she never displayed. There was a folder marked K." She paused. It had only one thing inside, a single Polaroid. Keanu's voice, when it finally came, was low. "What was it?" "You," Clara said softly. "You and her, from the speed set. You're both laughing at something. She's got her hand on your chest. It's not posed, it's real. It's like someone caught you both mid-moment." She wrote on the back, "This was the moment I knew." That's all, no date, no name, just that. He didn't know what to say, didn't even know how to breathe for a moment, because he remembered that photo. Not the picture itself, but the exact moment. It was after a take. They were running the bus scene. She'd made a joke about the coffee being so bad it could qualify as a biohazard. He'd laughed, she'd leaned into him, and for that 1 second, no cameras, no crew, just her hand against his chest, he had felt like the world had stopped, like the chaos around them had stilled. He remembered thinking, if this is all we ever are, I'll still be grateful. Clara asked if he wanted the photo. He told her yes, and then unexpectedly she added something else. "She also kept a voicemail from you, one I didn't understand until now. It was short, just 6 words. I played it, over and over. You said, 'You made the silence feel full.' I guess now I know what that meant." Keanu closed his eyes, emotions tightening in his chest like a rope pulled too far. That voicemail, he remembered leaving it. It had been after one of her premieres. He hadn't attended because he was filming overseas, but he'd watched the red carpet coverage alone in a Tokyo hotel room. She had looked luminous in that silver dress, smiling at reporters with that practiced ease. But in one brief clip, caught off guard, she had looked away from the crowd, just for a second, and her face had softened, become real. No performance, just her. And in that raw, fleeting look, he'd seen the Sandra he knew. That night, after 2 whiskeys and a missed call, he'd left her that voicemail. Nothing more, no explanation, no name, just those 6 words. And she had saved it. All these years. Later that evening, he pulled out a small wooden box from the back of his closet. It was hand-carved, something he'd bought on impulse at a street market in Prague, telling himself it would be perfect for letters. He had never filled it, not until now. He opened the lid and placed both letters inside, hers and his. Then he added the Polaroid Clara sent, gently smoothing the edges. The box wasn't just for keepsakes anymore. It was a home for the parts of their story the world would never see. A place where their silences, their almosts, and their always would live together. He didn't cry, but he did something rare. He smiled. Not the smile of someone remembering what was lost, but the smile of someone realizing that some love stories don't end when the people do. They echo. They breathe in between the lines of letters. They flicker through old photos. They travel in words saved on voicemails. They live in jasmine gardens built for children who don't know the names of the ghosts who built their futures. That night, Keanu sat at his piano again, this time with a notebook beside him. He began writing, not a script, not a song, but a letter, not to Sandra, but to the version of himself that never spoke up. He wrote about the years he stayed quiet, about the things he thought he'd forgotten but never did, about the sound of her laughter echoing in his memory like a bell rung softly from another room, about the feeling of her hand on his shoulder when he didn't know he needed anchoring. And when he was done, he closed the notebook and whispered to no one in particular. We didn't miss our moment, we lived it just differently. The stars outside blinked like quiet applause, and for the first time in a long while, Keanu slept without dreaming. Because some stories don't need an audience. Some are just for the soul. Her voice on the tape, the unfinished interview. It was almost poetic, the way the past kept finding him, not in grand gestures or dramatic reunions, but in quiet, delicate intrusions that knocked gently at the walls he thought he had sealed. Keanu had always been a man of solitude, finding comfort in the corners of stillness that most people ran from. But in the months since that one podcast interview, the one that was never meant to become a tribute, his solitude had become something different, not emptiness but presence. Sandra's presence, her letter framed by the piano, the Polaroid in the carved box, the voicemail he still hadn't erased. These weren't just memories, they were living echoes, shaping his days in a way no spotlight ever could. He had thought the story had finally come full circle, but fate, ever the quiet author behind the scenes, had one more page to offer. It arrived one afternoon wrapped in a manila envelope without a sender, no return address, just his name printed neatly and below it in handwriting that punched a hole in his chest. To be heard when you're ready. It was Sandra's handwriting. He knew it instantly, the curve of the R, the long stem of her H. For a moment, he thought it was a mistake, some cruel fan fiction sent by someone online who had seen too much of the headlines. But when he turned the envelope over and saw the embossed initials, SAB, on the seal, his breath left him. This wasn't fiction, this was her. Inside, a single audio tape, analog, old school, the kind of thing no one used anymore unless they were being intentionally sentimental. He found his dusty cassette player in a box in the attic, the one he used for rehearsing old lines or replaying interviews from decades ago. He sat down slowly, his fingers trembling slightly as he pressed the play button. And then her voice. Soft, clear, unedited. No makeup, no filter, just Sandra. As if she were sitting in the room, leaning in from across the table with her chin resting in her palm, smiling without needing to be seen. Hey, you, she said casually, a laugh escaping right after like she was embarrassed. If you're hearing this, I guess I never figured out how to say this out loud. Not to you, not directly, but I always wanted to. Keanu leaned forward, gripping the arm of the chair like a man bracing against a wave. This isn't for a book or a show or an audience. This is just for you, Keanu, because you were the one person I could never lie to, even when I said nothing at all. I used to wonder if we missed something, if we should have tried harder, pushed more. But the truth is we did try, in all the ways we knew how. You gave me silence when I needed peace. You gave me friendship when the world asked me to perform. And when everything around us became noise, you became my pause button. Her voice wavered for a second, like she had moved the mic away to breathe. Do you remember New Orleans? That diner with the fried green tomatoes? God, we talked for hours about nothing. But that was the day I realized, if I ever had to grow old with someone, I'd want it to be you. Not because we were perfect, but because we were real. The tape word clicked, resumed. I never wanted to hurt you by staying silent. I just didn't want to risk ruining the one safe place I had left. You were my safe place. Even when we were 1,000 miles apart, you were my home. There was a long pause. Keanu closed his eyes, his hands shaking now, his breath uneven. If you're still listening, then I guess I'll say it, out loud, for real this time. I loved you, Keanu, not as a co-star, not as a best friend. I loved you with all the pieces of me I never showed the world. And if this is the last time my voice ever touches your ears, I hope it lands gently. The tape ended with the softest of clicks. But in Keanu's chest, something thundered open. He didn't move for a long time after that. The room felt suspended in time, filled with a presence more profound than anything he'd felt since losing her. Her voice lingered like warmth in the air, as though the walls themselves were echoing her final confession. It wasn't just closure, it wasn't just grief, it was truth. The kind of truth that doesn't need explaining, it just is. That evening he walked outside as the sun dipped behind the Hollywood Hills. In one hand he held the cassette, in the other a letter he wrote minutes after hearing her voice. Not to reply, not to respond, but to thank her for loving him, for carrying him, for daring to speak even when silence had once felt safer. And then, for the first time in years, he did something he hadn't done since the night she passed. He lit a candle on the piano. The flame flickered quietly in the dark room, and with it, a whisper of something eternal, love not measured by years but by presence, by all the things left unsaid and now finally heard. The garden they never walked, but he built anyway. There are moments that don't belong to time. They exist outside the reach of clocks and calendars, hovering somewhere between memory and meaning. For Keanu Reeves, the weeks after hearing Sandra's voice were stitched together with these kinds of moments, quiet, unhurried, sacred, the kind that refused to be posted, packaged, or explained, the kind that linger in a man's soul long after the world moves on. He didn't go back to the studio. He didn't return to the set of the film he was due to shoot. He made no announcement, gave no public reason, no headlines, no farewell tour. Instead, he disappeared into something far more important, honoring the echo of a woman who never demanded spotlight, only sincerity. It began with a single sketch on a napkin, a garden drawn clumsily in pencil with winding stone paths and small benches shaded by flowering trees. At the center, a circular area marked by a soft ring of jasmine. It wasn't meant to be a memorial. Sandra wouldn't have wanted that. "Don't name anything after me," she used to say with that teasing laugh. "Unless it's a sandwich, I'd love a Sandra special." No, this garden wasn't to immortalize her, it was to reflect her. Quiet, living. Breathing, a space for those who didn't have words, only feelings. A space where silence could speak and be understood. Keanu chose New Mexico, where Sandra had quietly donated to schools and shelters for years without telling the press. On a quiet stretch of land outside Santa Fe, he purchased 10 acres and called no architect. Instead, he brought in children, teenagers, women who had survived, teachers, storytellers, people Sandra had quietly touched during her lifetime and many who didn't even know it was her helping them. He gave them the sketch and simply said, "Build it the way love feels." And they did. They planted flowering dogwoods and climbing roses, not arranged in perfect symmetry but grown with wild freedom. They added benches that faced nothing in particular, some nestled under trees, others by little ponds filled with koi. The air was left to breathe. The sky was never blocked, and at the very center, just as Keanu had drawn, they planted jasmine. Dozens of them. The scent carried like a song through the winding paths, and on spring evenings it filled the lungs like memory itself. He visited often but never made himself known. He would walk the paths at dawn, long before others arrived, wearing that old leather jacket and a soft cap, blending into the silence like a man simply walking off his thoughts. Once he found a little girl sitting cross-legged in the center of the jasmine ring, sketching birds with crayons. She looked up at him and said, "This place feels like it's listening." He smiled and nodded. "It is." Back in Los Angeles, life returned to its noisy rhythm. Studios called, directors sent flowers with scripts tucked inside. Magazines begged for interviews, but Keanu remained still. He answered none of them, not because he was retreating, but because he was finally present. He started spending mornings reading the letters people sent him, not fan mail, but letters from strangers who had lost someone they never got to say goodbye to. People who had listened to the Joe Rogan interview and felt something unlock. Fathers who had never told their daughters they were proud. Friends who let a decade pass without one real conversation. Widows, widowers, people who had been in love with someone who never knew. They poured their hearts out in pen and ink, and Keanu read every word. He began writing back, not with advice or quotes, but with stories. His own stories. The kind that never made it to red carpets or trailers. He told them about the time Sandra made him hold a crying baby in a cafe so she could pay the waitress without dropping hot coffee. About the time she convinced him to try karaoke in a truck stop bar in Arizona, then laughed so hard she fell off the stool during his version of Elvis. About how she once made a paper swan from a receipt during a press junket and left it in his pocket without saying a word. And how he carried that paper swan for 3 years without ever unfolding it. He began to realize something deeper, that maybe the story wasn't just theirs anymore. Maybe it was everyone's, not because it was famous, but because it was human. Everyone had a Sandra. Everyone had someone they never told the truth to. Everyone had a letter they never wrote, a tape they never listened to, a photo they never framed. And maybe that was the point, not to chase closure, but to live wide open, to speak the truth even when it trembles, to love loudly even if the world never hears it. One evening he returned to the garden, this time carrying something in his hands. A small stone, carved not by machine but by an artist from a local school, the kind of piece you'd never find in a museum, but that held more soul than marble ever could. He walked to the center of the jasmine circle and knelt down slowly, placing the stone among the petals. It didn't have her name. It didn't have a date. It simply read, "We didn't miss the moment. We were the moment." And beneath it, a final line, K+S always somewhere. He sat there for hours, his hand resting gently on the stone, the wind carrying the scent of jasmine around him like a memory folding into the present. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He simply breathed, fully, deeply, as if for the first time in years the air finally understood him. When he left that night, he didn't turn back. He didn't have to, because in a garden tucked between stars and soil, a love that was never public had finally found its home. Not on screen, not in headlines, but in the silence that now bloomed with the sound of everything they never needed to say.